Well, hello again, BookTube. I wanted to talk to you today about the book that I read for this month's April event known as People April. If you have been living under a rock all this time and you don't know what People April is, that is a BookTube event on here dedicated to reading about people in real life, reading biographies, memoirs, letter collections, all things like that. And I was really expecting to have read more for this month, but I have struck out. I've struck out with one biography after another. Just not necessarily because the biography was bad, but it's definitely me. It's just that it just wasn't the right time for me to be reading the biography. Probably there was one biography I read that is definitely not because of me, but because I think the book is terrible. It was that biography of Don Rickles that I've been trashing for the past 3 videos that I've put on here. But the book I read today, I did enjoy a lot, and so this is for People April. I read Elaine Feinstein's biography of Anna Akhmatova. It's called Anna of All the Russias, and I had an interesting experience reading this, partially because this was one of the books that I started reading this at the beginning of the month, and it wasn't really working for me. One thing about the book was just that this Anna Akhmatova woman is really difficult to spend time with on the page, and just learning about her, especially in her younger years. She was just a particularly vicious woman, I thought. But so I put it down after about a week of just pub crawling through it, and then toward the end, of course this is the end of the month, I picked it back up and finished the rest of it, and I blasted through it. So I don't know what the big change was, but I enjoyed this a lot more, when I picked it back up and finished it. And so again, this is Anna Akhmatova. She was a poet in the Silver Age of Russian literature. That was somewhere sort of right around the time of the Russian Revolution. I think it started sometime in about 1910, 1912, and then lasted into the mid-1920s. I probably have those years wrong, but it's considered the Silver Age, where it wasn't as good or didn't have as much good output as the Golden Age of Russian literature, with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Gogol and all of those people. But a lot of poetry came out of this age, and Anna Akhmatova was arguably the most popular one. And there were 2 different poetry movements at the time. There was, I believe it's just called the Russian symbolism of poetry, and then there was something called Acmeism. And Akhmatova, she was the latter. And Acmeism was actually like a response to the symbolism movement of a lot of the Russian poets, where they were very big into mysticism, and it was definitely a sort of postmodern attempt at poetry, that not really, sort of vague. The symbolism, a lot of symbolism and allegory in their poetry, and the poets like Akhmatova, they were big into simple, clear language that everybody can understand, and you didn't need to have a PhD in order to get their poetry. You didn't have to be part of the club. Anyone could enjoy it. And part of the reason why I struggled to read this at first is because her poetry does not really do anything for me. It isn't because I think she is bad. It is just that she writes on a different wavelength from me, I guess. And so I tried reading a lot of her poetry before I read this book, and I enjoyed her longer poems like a Requiem and A Poem Without a Hero, but I enjoyed those. I didn't love them. And then all of her shorter poetry that she's known for, like Lot's Wife, really didn't. I struggled to understand the appeal of it, and so I thought, oh, okay, well, I like biographies, and so I'll read this biography of her. It'll be filled with her poetry. So I thought maybe this will get me into her. That did not work. And but as far as this book goes, it's again Elaine Feinstein. The book starts out really interesting. Feinstein decides to set you at first in the prologue in St. Petersburg in 1913. Akhmatova herself, she was born in 1889 and died in, I think, 1966. So she saw a lot of Russian history at that time. And but so Feinstein sets us in 1913 in St. Petersburg in this little cellar bar type place known as the Stray Dog. And at the time, around 1913, close to the Russian Civil War, that is where a lot of the Russian literary elites and the popular Russian poets and writers and actors at the time would go and hang out. It was sort of like a seedy little bar where everybody met, and it was one of those bars. I think it was on Mikhailovskaya Street. I don't know, one of the 50-letter Russian name streets that they have there, and it sets us in that sort of smoking, dark, oppressive atmosphere that Akhmatova was. She was a frequent visitor there. A lot of the people that she slept with were visitors there, and everyone that's mentioned in this book, basically everyone that's mentioned in this book, was a frequent caller at this place, and that was an interesting way to start it out because there's the prologue there, and then it sets us, right at the beginning whenever she's born, and that prologue really hooks you, and it really hooked me. I thought it was a really interesting way to start it out. I have very limited experience with biographies, of course, and the reading experience itself, sort of like what is on the cover. I'm not sure how to explain it, but it felt like you were reading the book in black and white. Sort of like in the movie Schindler's List, how it was made in 1990, but Spielberg decided for whatever reason to shoot the movie in black and white. That's sort of what it felt like when I was reading this. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but like the images that were in my head as I was reading this, it felt like I was watching a black and white film. And yeah, so Akhmatova, she was born in, I think, in Odessa, in present-day Ukraine, and like her parents and everyone around her knew from the time she was really young that she was vastly different from every other kid. She just had this sort of presence and this way about her, the way that she carried herself, a very sort of dark individual in terms of her emotions. And that definitely shows up in her poetry, I will admit that. And as she got older, she started to write poetry, so she got high marks in her writing. And something I thought was really interesting was that, like, from the time she was like late teens, early 20s, she got tuberculosis, and she was sick. She had something wrong with her for the majority of her adult life. And tuberculosis, she was constantly in and out of sanitariums, and then late, as she got older, she started to have heart issues. That was actually what killed her. Some of the stuff, and she just had all kinds of physical problems. Some of it you could probably argue was psychosomatic, especially in the era of Russia that she grew up in. She lived through the Russian Revolution. She lived through Lenin's Russia, lived through the Stalin's terror. The parts of this book that talk about the terror in like the early 30s are to me, they take over this whole book because just constantly that oppressive atmosphere and the paranoia that you would just live with on a daily basis, and Akhmatova had to live with on a daily basis, was just very sobering to read. And she was married. She was married twice and sort of had a common law third husband. But she slept with everybody. Something I learned that sort of the same theme with the Edna St. Vincent Millay biography. For whatever reason, poets like to sleep with each other constantly. Like she was married, but only on paper, because everybody in this literary scene, like we get to meet all these different Russian poets. Boris Pasternak is also featured in this a lot. He was a good friend of Akhmatova's, and these people just slept around on each other. And like when she had tuberculosis, and like all these people were sickly for so much of their lives, and they just slept with each other. Just yuck. But so she got married. Her first husband, I'm blanking on his first name, but his last name was Gumilyov, and he was a sort of Pushkin wannabe poet. And Akhmatova mentioned this quotes a lot from like her diaries and from her letters to other people, and she mentioned that she was getting married not because she really wanted to, but because she felt like it was her fate to do it. And that was interesting, sort of sad to read, but she just felt like she was destined to get married. She felt like it was what she was supposed to do. And then she got pregnant and had a kid. Why am I blanking on his name? I have my notes here. Lev. Yeah. So she was 23 when she had Lev, and really, she and her husband pretty much gave him up to be raised by Gumilyov's mother. And you get the sense whenever you're reading this book pretty early on that Akhmatova was quite useless in everything in her life but poetry. She was very smart, very book smart, had a decent judge of people, but ask her to do anything practical and she just stares at you like a deer in the headlights. And there's an interesting quote from somebody in the book that if I can find it here. Yes. This is a quote from somebody talking about how useless Akhmatova was. It said, "She speaks of Akhmatova abandoning her son to the care of Gumilyov's mother, and attributes that decision to Akhmatova being a poet who could not bear the chores of washing clothes or cooking for other people. She knew very well that Anna loved children, but thought it was chiefly other people's children, for whom she did not have to take responsibility like the Smirnovs, some people that she lived with. All her life she had not been able to concern herself with practical matters." So, yeah, just like that, she knew poetry and not much else. And it was interesting that, she knew literary criticism too, something I thought was kind of funny, but also a little scary, was that she was pretty good with literary criticism. She did a lot of research on Russian writers at the time. She, like everyone else, did a bunch of research on Pushkin, and she was brutally honest in her opinions about other people's poetry or books. She actually did not like Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago at all, and so and it didn't matter if you were her friend or if you were her enemy. She was brutally honest about your work, and yeah. So I thought that was interesting, and also especially whenever she was younger. Like I said, she slept and cheated on all her husbands. Her husbands cheated on her, and she would even so she would live with the people whom she was cheating on her husband with, and she was also, and Feinstein points this out, that she was particularly venomous toward the women whose husband she was sleeping with. She was particularly venomous toward them and was very not nice to them, very like a tiger in the jungle. And I thought that was interesting because, and one of the reasons why she was venomous is because she felt like she had moral superiority over them. At least to me, that's what it seemed like, and that couldn't be further from the truth. She was scummy like the rest, like the husband she was sleeping with, and so just, and while all of this is happening, she is not there for her son at all, and so yeah, that's just an interesting something I thought was a really interesting part of her early adulthood. From the time she was about 20 to 40, she was just not a nice person. And I think that's partially why I had issues reading this book the first time, was because you're sitting with a person who you don't care for her poetry to begin with, and she's not a particularly nice person either, and also just in that miserable atmosphere of Russia at the time. This whole book is just one miserable event after another. It just seems like what the Russians are good at is misery. It's kind of like reading a story of Dostoevsky, and as she got older, like, she had sort of an epiphany around age like 45 or 50. She had the sort of epiphany that she was a pretty monstrous person whenever she was younger, and so one of the things she tried to do to rectify that was to, be there for her son. But her son he was becoming an adult, and he really, and also her husband was one of the many people who was killed in the Red Terror at Gumilyov. And so this kid, Lev, he didn't have a father, and he really didn't have much of a mom. And so after the person that raised him died, Gumilyov's mother, he didn't have anybody to take comfort in. I think that's really the great tragedy of this whole book, is it's such a bad relationship that she had with her son, and like, she really did not care at all whenever she was younger about raising her son or doing anything for her son. And as she got older, she realized that, that was a bad idea. She realized that, I wasn't there for my son at all. And then she tried to do things for her son, but her son had already decided that he hated her, and she was also too sick to do anything for him. And you got the impression, especially as she was younger, that no matter who she was dealing with, she had a thought in the back of her mind that was similar to, well, how is this going to affect me? And so, yeah, that was kind of a sad part of this book to read. And another issue I had with this book is that there's so many Russian names in this that a lot of times I had to keep going back to the pages and saying, okay, well, who was that again? And so, and even though she was not a very nice person, she was terrible with money. Again, no practical matters, no practical skills at all. And there was a point where it even said that she was recklessly generous with her money because she never had she never had two nickels to rub together, or two kopecks, if you will. Um, and but in any little amount of money that she got, she would give it to other people. Like she had no desire for material things in life, mostly because she never had a whole lot. And especially living through Stalin's terror, uh, Lev, by that time, Lev was, he was a young adult, and he'd been arrested probably like 3 times during the terror uh, by the Soviet secret police. And reading that part, that's the most interesting part of the book. Part of the book for me was reading about the terror. There's even a scene where Akhmatova is she's sitting in one of the millions of houses that she lived in temporarily. She's sitting in the basement of that house talking to somebody, and then they can hear the Soviet police breaking into the house and installing microphones into the walls to listen to Akhmatova and whoever she was with. Like that is just, the paranoia was just amazing to read about, or in a bad way. And when you read about her daily life and the constant moving of houses and jumping back and forth, she never lived in a house for more than like a year. She was constantly moving houses, living with other people. And you just sit there and you're reading this and you think, how can someone live like this? And so, but she did. Like, some of it was her fault, and other parts of it was just the Soviet Union and Stalin just being absolutely terrible. Um, yeah, so this was an enjoyable reading experience. If you like her poetry, um, then you will definitely like this biography. Um, it's just that the poetry doesn't do anything for me. Um, I'll read you one poem, and then I'll quit because this has gone on too long. Um, this is called The Last Rose, if I can find it. Yep, yep. And this is the last verse of The Last Rose. Dear Lord, you see how tired I am of dying, resurrection, life itself. Take everything away, but let me still savor the freshness of this scarlet rose. That's the last part of this poem called The Last Rose, and then there's another poem here. Let's see if this does anything for you. In spite of all the promises you made when you took the ring from my hand, in your deepest being you forgot me and could give me no help at all. So why once again are you sending your spectre to haunt me tonight? He is young, red-haired, and handsome with a woman's good looks, and whispers about Rome and Paris and Wales like a hired mourner, claiming how indifferent to prison or disgrace he is, and couldn't bear to live without me. I found I could manage without him. If that just doesn't do anything for me. Like, I can definitely tell that there is something there. Like, there is something here that I'm just not connecting with at all. I think partially why I don't like it is because it doesn't read like poetry to me. It reads like a sentence. It's just that it's cut into stanzas. And I don't know why she didn't just write prose instead of poetry or verse. But again, that's just me. As far as I know, I'm the only person who doesn't like her poetry. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. And so yeah, this was my April read. I really wanted to have read more biographies, but I need to start getting ready for the May event that Steve Donahue and I are doing, The Sound of May. All books dedicated to music. So if you don't know about that, consider joining. But this is my April read. So hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time.